Hello everyone, I'll be showing you how to do homework number 4 of your software project management course. So in order to start doing the homework, you just need to navigate to the course website and go to your topic 4. So here you can find the homework number 4 individual assignments. As mentioned, each student should download 2 variants based on your class ID and perform this assignment for 2 variants. You can see like a student with class ID 7 must complete and submit 2 assignments with number 7 and 17. So based on your class IDs, just you need to download your variants. And also on the course website, you can find the homework number 4 description. So if you just open this is how it looks like. So this is the homework number 4 assignment. So each student should complete 2 assignments, and in these assignments you should calculate all these. Like for each activity, you should calculate the early start, late start, early finish, late finish, and slack times. So if you just open your variant, this is how it looks like. This is all the information that will be provided in your variants, like the activity number, duration, and immediate predecessor. While these are all the fields that you need to calculate, like you need to calculate for each activity early start, early finish, late start, late finish, and slack time. We also should find out if the particular activity lies on the critical path or not. Okay, so before start doing with the calculation part, we just need to first draw a diagram. So if you just go to your course website, you can find like the critical path description and an example, all this. So the critical path, it's nothing but the longest path in the schedule or shortest time the project can be completed. So first, before we start the calculations, we just draw a diagram like which represents all the activities based on the information given. Like we have the activities and the immediate predecessors and duration. Based on this information, we first draw a diagram. Okay, so this is how the diagram looks like after we draw it based on the information given. Like, okay, so the information given to us like in the variant which I am performing is like for activity number 1, there is no predecessor. So it's just the start of our project. Like this is activity number 1, which doesn't have any predecessor. We can see that for activity number 2, activity 1 is the predecessor. So from 1, 2 should arise. Like from 1, an arrow point out towards 2. So which shows that for 2, 1 is the predecessor. Now you can see that for activity number 3, 2 is the predecessor. So from 2, 3 should arise. Like 2 point outs an arrow towards 3. You can see that for this activity 3, 2 is the predecessor. Similarly, for activity number 4, 3 is the predecessor. So from 3, 4 arrives. Like 3 point outs an arrow towards 4. So for 4, this 3 is predecessor. Now you can see that for activity number 5, 2 is the predecessor. So again, from 2, activity number 5 should arise. Like 2 should point out an arrow towards activity number 5. Now you can see for 5, 2 is the predecessor. And for 6, 4 is the predecessor. So from 4, 6 should arise. Like 4 point outs an arrow towards activity 6. So you can see for the 6, 4 is the predecessor. For 7, 5 is the predecessor. You can see like from 5, 7 arises. Like 5 point outs an arrow towards 7. So for this 7, 5 is the predecessor. And for 8, 6 is the predecessor. From 6, 8 arises, showing that for 8, 6 is the predecessor. And for 9, 7 is the predecessor. From 7, 9 arises, like 7 point outs an arrow towards 9, showing that for this activity number 9, this 7 is the predecessor. And finally, for activity number 10, you can see that we have 2 predecessors, 8 and 9. So 10 arises from both 8 and 9. Both 8 and 9 point out arrows towards this activity number 10, like which shows that for this particular activity 10, we have 2 predecessors, which are 8 and 9. So based on the information given in your variant, you should first draw this diagram, which shows all the activities. After drawing the diagram, like for each activity, we need to find out all these fields. Like we need to find out early start, early finish, late start, late finish, and slack time. Like this details nothing but the duration, which is already given to us. For activity number 1, it is 2. Okay. So I've just entered the duration for all the activities, and these are all the fields which we'll be calculating. Okay, now let us see how to do this calculation part. Okay, so first we'll be starting with early start and early finish. So you can see like calculation of early start and early finish, like projects. This calculation proceeds from project start to project end, like from the first activity to the nth activity. Over here we have like 10 activities, so we proceed from activity number 1 to activity number 10, or from left to right, like this direction. We proceed from this direction while calculating the early start and early finish. Okay, so for activity number 1. So since this is the first activity, we have the early start as 0 and early finish. To calculate the early finish, we have duration of the activity 1, 2. So we have to add 2 to this 0. So 0 plus 2, which is nothing but 2. Okay. So next, for activity number 2, we have the immediate predecessor of activity number 1. So the early start for this activity number 2 will be the early finish of the previous activity, like which is activity number 1, as it is the predecessor. So the early start for 2 will be the early finish of 1, which is 2. Now the duration for activity 2 is 3. So 2 plus 3, which is 5, will be the early finish. Okay, so for activity number 3, 2 is the immediate predecessor. So the early finish of 2, which is 5, will be the early start of 3. And the duration of 3 is 3. So 5 plus 3, which is 8, will be the early finish for activity number 3. Similarly, for activity number 4, the immediate predecessor is 3. So the early start for activity number 4 will nothing be but the early finish of the activity number 3, which will be 8. And the duration for this activity 4 is 7. So we have 8 plus 7, 15 as the early finish. Now for activity number 5, we have the immediate predecessor as activity number 2. So the early finish of activity number 2 will be the early start for activity number 5. So we have early start as 5 and we have the duration for activity 5 as 6. So 5 plus 6, 11 will be the early finish for activity number 5. Next, for activity number 6, we have the immediate predecessor as 4. So for activity number 4, the early finish is 15, which will be the early start for activity number 6. And we have the duration as 1. So 15 plus 1 will be 16, which will be the early finish for this activity number 6. Now for activity number 7, we have 5 as the immediate predecessor. And for activity number 5, 11 is the early finish, which will be the early start for this activity number 7. And we have the duration as 5. So 11 plus 5 is 16, which will be the early finish for activity number 7. Next, we have activity number 8, for which activity number 6 is the predecessor. So for this activity number 6, 16 is the early finish, so which will be the early start value for activity number 8. And we have the duration as 4. So 16 plus 4, it's 20, will be the early finish value for this activity number 8. Now for activity number 9, we have activity number 7 as the immediate predecessor. So the early finish of this activity number 7, 16, will be the early start value for this activity number 9. And we have duration as 8. So 16 plus 8 is 24, which will be the early finish value of this activity number 9. Then finally, for the activity number 10, we have two predecessors, like we have 8 and 9 as predecessor. So in order to determine which early finish value we have to take as the early start, so we have to take the largest among these two values. Like we have 8 and 9 as predecessors, so we have to take the largest value among the early finish of these two predecessors, like 20 or 24. Since 24 is the largest among both these values, we take 24 as the early start for this activity number 10. And since the duration is 2, we have the early finish as 24 plus 2, 26. So this is how you calculate the early start and early finish. There's only one case, like where we have, for a particular activity, if there are two predecessors, while considering the early start, we should make sure we select the highest value among both those predecessors, like highest early finish value as the early start for this activity which has two predecessors. Okay, now that we have completed calculating early start and early finish, let us see the calculation part for late start and late finish. If you can see, so while calculation of late start and late finish, we start from project end to project start. Like we move from project end, like nth activity to first activity. This is the direction which we move. Since here we have 10 activities, we move from 10th activity to first activity. Okay, so let us start our calculation part. So since the project finish time is 26, we enter late finish for activity number 10 as 26. Okay, now the duration is 2. So we need to subtract the duration from this late finish to obtain the late start. So 26 minus 2, it's 24, which will be the late start for this activity number 10. Now for activity number 9, to determine the late finish. So this activity number 9 is the predecessor for activity number 10. So the late start of activity number 10 will be the value of late finish of activity number 9, which is 24. Now we have the duration as 8. So 24 minus 8 is 16, which will be the late start for activity 9. Now for activity number 8, we also have activity number 8 as the predecessor for activity number 10. So the late finish value for this activity number 8 will also be the late start value of activity number 10, which is once again 24. And if we have the duration as 4, so 24 minus 4 will be 20, which will be the late start value of this activity number 8. Next, for activity number 7, to determine the late finish value, so we can see that activity number 7 is the predecessor for activity number 9. So the late start value of activity number 9 will be the late finish value of activity number 7, which is 16. And you can see that the duration is 5. So 16 minus 5 is 11, which will be the late start for activity number 7. Now for activity number 6, the late finish will be, so the activity number 6 is a predecessor for activity number 8. So the late start value of this activity number 8 will be the late finish value of this activity number 6, which is 20. And we have the duration as 1. So 20 minus 1 is 19, will be the late start value. Similarly, 5. Activity 5 is predecessor for activity number 7. So the late start value of activity number 7, which is 11, will be the late finish value of activity number 5. And we have the duration as 6. So 11 minus 6 will be 5, which will be the late start value of activity number 5. Now activity number 4. We can see that activity 4 is the predecessor for activity number 6. So the late start value of this activity number 6 will be the late finish value of activity number 4, which is nothing but 19. So we have the duration as 7. So 19 minus 7 is 12. Now 3. Activity number 3 is a predecessor for activity number 4. So the late start value of activity 4 will be the late finish value of activity 3. We have 12 and the duration as 3. So 12 minus 3 will be 9, which will be the late start value of activity number 3. Now we have 2, which is the predecessor for activity number 3. So the late start value of activity number 3 will be the late finish value of activity number 2. However, we have one more activity, activity number 5, which is for which also activity number 2 is a predecessor. Like in determining this late finish value for activity number 2, we have to consider both these activities, like activity 3 and activity 5, since 2 is a predecessor for both these values. So now we have to determine which value we need to take, like 9 or 5. So we have both activities 3 and 5, of which 2 is a predecessor. In determining which value to take, we need to take the value with the lowest value. Like we have 9 and 5, and among both these values, 5 is the lowest. We have to take the lowest late start value as the late finish value. So we'll enter 5 as its 5 is least value among 9 and 5. Now we have the duration as 3 and 5 minus 3 it's 2. So for activity number 1, we can see that activity 1 is a predecessor of activity 2. So the late finish of activity number 1 will be the late start of activity 2, and 2 minus 2 it's 0, which will be the late start value of activity number 1. So this 2 we have subtracted 2 from this duration, so we got 0. So this is how we calculate late start and late finish. The only thing which we should worth noting is, like, when we have a particular activity as a predecessor for 2 activities, here we have 2 as the predecessor of 3 and 5. And at that case, while determining the late finish value of this activity number 2, we have to consider the least late start value among both these values for which this 2 is a predecessor. In this case, for 3 and 5, 2 is a predecessor. So in determining the late finish value of activity 2, we have to consider the least value among 9 and 5, like least late start value of the activities for which this activity is a predecessor. So that's the only thing worth noting. Now that we have calculated the late start and late finish values, let us have to calculate slack time. Slack time is nothing but the difference between early start and late start, or early finish and late finish. So it's nothing but either 0 minus 0 or 2 minus 2. Either value is 0. So for this activity number 2, we have it's 2 minus 2 or 5 minus 5, which is 0. For activity 3, we have 5 minus 9, which is 4, or 8 minus 12, which is again 4. So for activity 4, we have 8 minus 12 or 19 minus 15, which is 4. We have 5 minus 5 or 11 minus 11, which is 0. We have 19 minus 15 or 20 minus 16, which is 4. We have 11 minus 11 or 16 minus 16, which is 0. We have 20 minus 16 or 24 minus 20, which is 4. We have 16 minus 16 or 24 minus 24, which is 0. Like it's either the difference between late start and early start or late finish and early finish. So again, we have 24 minus 24 or 26 minus 26, which is 0. Okay, so this is how we have calculated the slack time. Now, to find out whether a particular activity is on critical path or not, we just see the slack time. If the value of slack time is 0, then that particular activity falls on critical path. So we write a S for all those activities which have the slack time as 0. And for those which do not have the slack time as 0, we write a no. So all those activities for which the slack time is not 0 do not fall on the critical path. Based on this, we just fill this column whether a particular activity falls on critical path or not. Okay, so this is how we have figured out the critical path. So now we can see that the activities 1, 2, 5, 7, 9 and 10 fall on the critical path. Now we need to fill all this information onto our diagram. Like for all the activities, we need to fill all these fields. So for instance, for activity number 1, we have early start, early finish as 0, 2, late start, late finish as 0, 2 and slack time as 0. So we just need to enter this 0, 2, 0, 2 and 0. Similarly, we need to enter this information for all the activities and we need to highlight the critical path in red color. So after we enter all the fields and after we highlight the critical path, this is how the diagram should look like. So this is the critical path which I've highlighted in red color, and you can hear over here you can just mention the critical path, all the activities which fall on the critical path. So this is how the final diagram looks like after we have filled all the fields, and this is the table which looks like after filling all the fields. So this is how you need to perform this assignment. So you need to do it for 2 variants based on your class ID and submit to your instructor. Thank you so much.